I still remember the exact moment when I stopped existing in my parents' eyes. I was 14, sitting at the kitchen table with my sketchbook, lost in designing what I thought was a pretty cool logo for my friend's gaming channel. My mother walked past, glanced over my shoulder, and said to my father, "At least Victoria is studying something useful." That single sentence, casual, dismissive, delivered without malice but with absolute certainty, became the template for the next 8 years of my life. My name is Maya Chen, and until the day of my college graduation, I was the invisible daughter, the one who didn't quite measure up, the one whose accomplishments were always prefaced with "that's nice," and whose dreams were treated like hobbies that I'd eventually outgrow. My sister Victoria, 3 years older and golden in every conceivable way, was the pediatrician. I was the girl who played on computers. What my family didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they never bothered to look, was that while they were investing all their attention, pride, and emotional energy into Victoria's traditional path to success, I was quietly building an empire they couldn't even comprehend. And on what should have been one of the proudest days of my life, they pushed me far enough that I finally showed them exactly who I'd become. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning to help you understand how deep this wound really went. Growing up as the second daughter in the Chen household meant living in a very specific kind of shadow. My parents, both immigrants who'd fought their way into upper-middle-class stability through sheer determination and sacrifice, had a rigid blueprint for success. My father was a civil engineer, my mother a pharmacist. They believed in degrees that led to licenses, careers that came with clear hierarchies and retirement plans, professions that their friends at church would nod approvingly about. Medicine, law, accounting, engineering, these were real careers. Everything else was a risk they'd fled China to avoid. Victoria understood this instinctively. She was always the perfect daughter, the one who brought home report cards that made our parents beam with pride, who got into Princeton for pre-med, who dated appropriate boys from appropriate families, who called home every Sunday without fail. I loved my sister, genuinely, but I also resented her in ways I'm still unpacking. It wasn't her fault that she fit perfectly into the mold our parents had created. It wasn't her fault that she made everything look effortless, while I struggled to earn even a fraction of the approval she received without trying. When I told my parents during my junior year of high school that I wanted to study graphic design and digital media, my father actually laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but the kind of chuckle you might give a child who announces they want to be a dinosaur when they grow up. "That's not a major," he said, returning to his newspaper. "That's a hobby. You'll study business administration, maybe minor in marketing if you want to be creative." My mother was more direct. "Maya, we didn't sacrifice everything to come to this country so you could struggle as an artist. Do you know how many talented people are waiting tables because they chose passion over practicality?" She touched my cheek gently, the way she used to when I was small. "We love you too much to let you make that mistake." But I was stubborn, a trait I'd inherited from them even if they refused to recognize it in me. I applied to the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts behind their backs, specifically to the Media Arts plus Practice program. When I got in with a partial scholarship, I presented it as a fait accompli. The fight that followed lasted 3 weeks. My father called it a betrayal. My mother cried, saying I was throwing away my future. Victoria, to her credit, tried to mediate, but even she gently suggested I consider something more stable. The compromise we reached was brutal in its simplicity. They would pay for my first year, and only my first year. After that, if I insisted on continuing with this art nonsense, I was on my own. They'd keep me on their health insurance, but tuition, housing, food, everything else was my responsibility. They framed it as tough love, as letting me learn the hard way that creative careers didn't pay bills. I think they genuinely believed I'd come crawling back after a year, ready to transfer into economics or accounting. Instead, I got angry. Not the explosive kind of angry that burns bright and fades fast, but the cold, calculated fury that becomes fuel. If they wanted proof that I could make this work, I'd give them proof. If they wanted me to fail so they could say, "I told you so," I'd make damn sure that failure was never an option. I started freelancing the summer before college even started. I taught myself advanced Photoshop and Illustrator beyond what high school had offered, watched hundreds of hours of tutorials on typography and brand identity, studied design theory like my life depended on it. Because, in a way, it did. I reached out to small businesses on Craigslist, offering logo design for $50, then 100, then 200 as my portfolio grew. I designed wedding invitations, business cards, Instagram graphics for influencers trying to build their brands. I was charging pennies compared to what the work was worth, but I was learning, improving, and most importantly, earning. By the time freshman year started, I had a steady stream of clients and about $8,000 saved. It felt like a fortune. My parents never asked about it, never questioned how I was managing to buy textbooks and supplies. In their minds, I was probably still living off birthday money from relatives, playing at independence while reality waited to humble me. USC was transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't just learning design principles and software, I was learning how to think about visual communication, user experience, storytelling through imagery. My professors saw something in me that my parents never had, not just talent, but a work ethic that bordered on obsessive. I pulled all-nighters not because I procrastinated, but because I was working on 3 client projects while completing my coursework, and sleep felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. During my sophomore year, everything changed. I'd been designing merchandise for a small YouTube creator, someone with maybe 50,000 subscribers who couldn't afford agency rates. The designs I created, a series of minimalist illustrations playing with their catchphrases, went viral. Within 2 weeks, they'd sold over 10,000 units. The creator's channel exploded to 500,000 subscribers. And suddenly, my DMs were flooded with requests. I raised my rates. Significantly, what started as $200 logo packages became $5,000 brand identity systems. I was working with YouTubers, Twitch streamers, small gaming companies, independent musicians. I created an LLC under a different name, Lotus Creative Studio, because I had a feeling my parents would Google my actual name looking for evidence of my inevitable failure, and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of watching my success while still disapproving of it. The money started becoming substantial. My sophomore year, I pulled in $60,000 while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. I paid my tuition in full at the start of each semester, paid for an apartment off campus that was nicer than the dorm I'd started in, and still had money left over. During family dinners, when my parents would ask how I was managing financially, I'd shrug and say I had some part-time work. They'd nod, relieved they didn't have to hear details about my art hobby, and quickly redirect the conversation to Victoria's research projects or clinical rotations. Junior year was when I landed my first truly major client, though I didn't realize it at the time. A small indie record label reached out, asking if I could design an album cover for an artist they were confident was going to break through. The artist's name was Luna, and she was a 20-year-old with a voice like honey and heartbreak. She sent me her demos, told me about the album's themes: love, loss, identity, the feeling of being caught between 2 cultures, and something clicked. I created a cover that was both minimal and deeply emotional. A silhouette of a girl's profile filled with a starscape, her features outlined in gold foil, her hair bleeding into darkness filled with city lights. It took me 3 weeks of obsessive refinement, turning down other projects to focus solely on getting it perfect. Luna cried when she saw it. The label called it genius. They paid me $15,000, which felt absurd for what amounted to a single image, but they insisted it was worth it. 6 months later, Luna's album went platinum. The cover was everywhere, on billboards, in Spotify ads, printed on vinyl that sold for hundreds of dollars to collectors. I'd signed away the rights for that initial fee, which was my own naivety, but the exposure was invaluable. Suddenly, I wasn't just designing for internet creators. I was getting inquiries from actual record labels, entertainment companies, brands with budgets. I hired a lawyer to help me navigate contracts. I raised my rates again. I started being selective about projects, only taking on work that genuinely excited me or paid well enough to justify the time investment. My junior year income was over $100,000. I was 20 years old, paying my own way through one of the most expensive private universities in the country, and building a client roster that most established designers would envy. And yet, when I went home for Thanksgiving that year, my mother introduced me to her church friends as our daughter who's still in school, while introducing Victoria as our daughter the doctor. The distinction was made with such casual certainty that it didn't even register as an insult in her mind, it was just fact. Victoria was the success story. I was still in the before stage, waiting to become something real. I smiled, nodded, and excused myself to the bathroom where I checked my email and confirmed a $30,000 project with a major athletic apparel company who wanted me to design their Pride Month campaign. The irony wasn't lost on me. Neither was the loneliness. Senior year was my masterpiece period, though nobody in my family would have recognized it as such. I'd started experimenting with animation and motion graphics, expanding beyond static design into something more dynamic. A friend from school connected me with a marketing agency in Los Angeles that was pitching a major campaign for a new electric vehicle company trying to compete with Tesla. They needed a designer who understood both luxury branding and environmental messaging, who could create something that felt premium without being pretentious. I threw myself into that project with everything I had. For 3 months, I lived and breathed that campaign, designing the logo, the color palette, the entire visual language, the promotional materials, the website interface, even the animations for their launch video. I was on calls with executives who had no idea they were talking to a college senior. My contact at the agency kept me anonymous, referring to me only as our lead creative, which worked perfectly for me. The campaign launched during Super Bowl week. $50 million in ad spend, primetime commercial slots, billboard takeovers in major cities. The design was mine, every pixel, every color choice, every curve of typography. It was simultaneously the most exposed I'd ever been and the most invisible. The agency won awards. The car company's stock jumped. I got paid $120,000 and signed an NDA that meant I couldn't publicly claim credit for 5 years. That same week, I had Sunday dinner at my parents' house. My father was watching the Super Bowl, and the commercial came on my design, my creative vision playing on a screen in front of the entire family. He turned to my mother and said, "This is brilliant marketing. This is the kind of sophisticated work that makes real money, not like those internet graphics Maya wastes her time on." I sipped my tea and said nothing. Victoria caught my eye across the table, and for just a moment, I thought I saw understanding there. But she didn't say anything either. Nobody ever did. The other major project of my senior year came from an unexpected place. A gaming company I'd done merchandise design for 2 years earlier reached out with an offer. They were launching a new multiplayer game and wanted me to design not just the logo, but the entire visual identity, including character skins, interface elements, promotional artwork. It was a 6-month contract worth $80,000 with royalties on any merchandise sold featuring my designs. I took it, which meant essentially working 2 full-time jobs, my coursework and thesis project during the day, the gaming contract at night and on weekends. I survived on coffee, meal replacement shakes, and the kind of stubborn determination that probably should have concerned my friends more than it did. My roommate used to joke that I was going to design myself into an early grave, and she wasn't entirely wrong. But I also knew this opportunity wouldn't come around twice, and I needed to prove to myself that I could handle projects of this scale. The game launched 3 months before my graduation. It became a moderate hit, nothing world-changing, but solid enough to build a dedicated player base. The merchandise, t-shirts, posters, phone cases, all featuring my designs, sold well enough that my royalty checks started coming in at around $3,000 a month, passive income that would continue for the life of the product line. I had started college with my parents, funding 1 year, and their expectation that I'd fail. I was ending it with over $340,000 in total earnings across 4 years, 0 student debt, a portfolio that would make most professionals jealous, and a job offer from a major tech company in Silicon Valley. A 6-figure starting salary with stock options and benefits that would have made my parents' sacrifices seem quaint by comparison. I turned it down, not out of arrogance, but because I'd spent 4 years building something that was entirely mine, and I wasn't ready to trade ownership for stability even comfortable stability. I'd already registered the business license for Lotus Creative Studio as a full-fledged agency. I had 3 contractors ready to come on board, a client waitlist that would keep us busy for the next year, and a business plan that projected $500,000 in revenue by year 2. But my parents knew none of this. In their minds, I was about to graduate with a degree in computer art, probably unemployed or working some entry-level position making $30,000 a year if I was lucky. Certainly nothing compared to Victoria, who had just completed her residency and was starting her career as a pediatrician at a prestigious hospital. Graduation day arrived on a perfect May morning, the kind of Southern California weather that feels specifically designed for important moments. Warm but not hot, with a breeze that keeps everything comfortable. I'd invited my parents weeks ago, sent them the details, even reserved seats in the family section. Victoria was supposed to come too, though I knew her schedule was unpredictable. The ceremony was scheduled for 10 in the morning. By 9:30, I was in my cap and gown, lined up alphabetically with my fellow graduates, trying to steady my breathing and not think about whether my family had actually shown up. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was proud of myself regardless, that their attendance was symbolic at best since they'd never really supported this degree anyway. But it did matter. Of course it did. Some part of me, the part that was still 14 years old and desperate for my mother's approval, wanted them there to witness this achievement even if they didn't fully understand it. They arrived at 9:55, just as the processional music was starting. I spotted them from my position in line, my father in his one good suit, my mother in a dress that was formal but not festive, both of them looking vaguely uncomfortable, like they were attending an obligation rather than a celebration. Victoria wasn't with them. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way these things always are, speeches about possibility and the future, recognition of academic achievements. The slow procession of hundreds of students crossing the stage to receive diplomas that represented 4 years of work, sacrifice, and growth. When they called my name, Maya Chen, Bachelor of Arts in Media Arts and Practice, magna cum laude, I walked across that stage with my head high. My parents clapped politely, the same as they did for every other graduate they didn't know. After the ceremony, in the chaos of families reuniting and taking photos, I found my parents near the designated meeting spot. My mother hugged me, a quick squeeze that felt perfunctory. My father shook my hand, which was somehow worse than no physical contact at all. "Congratulations," he said. "You made it through." Made it through. Not "we're proud of you," or "this is an impressive achievement," or even "congratulations on your honors." Just "you made it through," like I'd survived an illness or completed a prison sentence rather than excelling at one of the top universities in the country. "Where's Victoria?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "She had her orientation at the hospital this morning," my mother explained, already pulling out her phone to check messages. "Very important, meeting all the senior staff, getting her official assignment. She felt terrible about missing this, but you understand how it is, her career is really taking off now." Her career. Not Victoria's important day conflicting with mine, but her career taking priority because it was real and mine, implicitly, was not. "We should get lunch," my father said, checking his watch. I made a reservation for 1 o'clock at Rustic Canyon. Victoria said she'd try to meet us there if her orientation finishes in time. Of course he had. Victoria's orientation was scheduled for the same day as my graduation, and rather than expecting her to skip it for my ceremony, they'd planned the day around her schedule. I was the afterthought, the secondary calendar event to be accommodated around the main attraction. We took separate cars to the restaurant, which gave me 45 minutes alone to alternately cry and give myself angry pep talks in the rearview mirror. I'd graduated with honors. I'd built a successful business. I was financially independent. I didn't need their validation. Except I did, desperately, in a way that made me feel weak and childish but no less real. Rustic Canyon was one of those upscale casual Lowe's Angels restaurants where the prices don't appear on the menu, and the servers describe every dish like it's a personal favor they're doing you. My father had chosen it because it was nice enough to mark an occasion, but not so formal as to feel like a real celebration. We were shown to a table on the patio, shaded by trees strung with lights that would look magical in the evening, but felt slightly try-hard in the afternoon sunlight. Victoria arrived 20 minutes after we'd sat down, sweeping in with the kind of energy that my sister had perfected over the years. Apologetic, but not actually sorry, harried, but glowing with the importance of whatever had delayed her. She hugged me tightly, and I could smell her expensive perfume and the faint antiseptic scent of the hospital. "Maya, I'm so sorry I missed the ceremony," she said, and she did sound genuinely regretful. The orientation ran long, and Dr. Peterson wanted to introduce me to everyone personally. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was, actually, because nobody had ever considered my professional commitments important enough to run long or make people wait. But I nodded and smiled because that's what I always did. We ordered drinks, wine for my parents and Victoria, water for me because I had a client call scheduled for later that evening. The server brought bread, and my father launched into a series of questions for Victoria about the hospital, the staff, her patient assignment rotation, the senior doctors she'd be working under. My mother asked about housing, whether the area was safe, if Victoria had found a good dry cleaner yet for her white coats. I sat there, still in my graduation dress, with my magna cum laude certificate folded in my purse, and watched my family celebrate my sister's first day of work while my college graduation became background noise. Finally, when there was a lull in the Victoria-focused conversation, my mother turned to me. "So Maya, what are your plans now? Have you started applying for jobs?" The question was asked with such genuine curiosity, as if it had never occurred to her that I might have already secured employment, or, heaven forbid, had opportunities worth discussing. Before I could answer, my father cut in. "There's no rush," he said, in the same tone he might use to console a child who didn't make the soccer team. "The job market is tough, especially in creative fields. You might need to take something entry-level at first, work your way up. That's just how these industries work." "Actually," I started, but Victoria interrupted, her voice warm with what I'm sure she thought was encouragement. "You know, Maya, I bet there are positions at the hospital that could use someone with your computer skills. We're always needing help with our social media and patient education materials. I could put in a word with the communications department. It probably wouldn't pay much to start, but it would be stable, with benefits." The offer was meant kindly, I think. My sister genuinely believed she was helping, throwing me a lifeline before I drowned in the creative industry's notoriously unstable waters. But what I heard was, "Your degree is worthless, your skills are remedial enough to be used for hospital Instagram posts, and you need me to rescue you from your own poor choices." "That's very thoughtful," my mother said approvingly. "Maya, you should take her up on that. It would be good to have something reliable, at least until you figure out what you really want to do." Until I figured out what I really wanted to do. As if the last 4 years had been exploratory wandering, rather than focused, intentional pursuit of a specific career path that I was already succeeding in beyond their comprehension. Our meals arrived, beautifully plated farm-to-table dishes that probably cost more per plate than I used to charge for entire design projects in my freshman year. We ate, and the conversation continued to orbit around Victoria's career, my parents' friends' children, and their successful professional trajectories, the state of the housing market, and whether Victoria should rent or buy. I was cutting into my halibut, barely tasting it, when my father did something I should have anticipated but somehow didn't see coming. He raised his wine glass, the afternoon sun catching the white wine and making it glow golden. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his voice carrying that particular tone of patriarchal authority that had dominated every family dinner of my childhood. Victoria and my mother raised their glasses. I followed suit mechanically, already knowing this wouldn't be for me. "To Victoria," he began, and my stomach dropped. "For achieving something truly remarkable. 4 years of undergraduate, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency, 11 years of dedication and hard work that have led to this moment. You are now a doctor, a healer, someone who will make a real difference in people's lives." He paused, his voice thickening with emotion I'd rarely heard from him. "Your mother and I are so incredibly proud. You've chosen a real career, one with stability, purpose, and respect. This is what success looks like." They clinked glasses. They drank. And I sat there, on the day of my college graduation, listening to my father define success in terms that explicitly excluded everything I'd accomplished, everything I'd worked for, everything I was. My mother, perhaps sensing some tension, tried to soften the moment. "Of course, we're happy for you too, Maya," she added, her tone making it clear this was an afterthought. "We hope you'll eventually find something stable, something you can build a life on. This art phase has been interesting, but it's time to think practically now. Maybe Victoria's idea about the hospital isn't bad. Or you could go back to school for something more marketable, business administration maybe. We'd be willing to help with that." The art phase, 4 years of maintaining a 3.8 GPA while building a six-figure business, was an art phase, something I needed to move past, grow out of, leave behind like a childhood teddy bear. My Aunt Jennifer, who had joined us straight from the graduation ceremony, nodded in agreement. "Your mother is right, Maya. Creative work is fine as a hobby, but you need security. Look at Victoria, she'll never have to worry about money or job security. That's the kind of future you should want." Then Uncle Robert, my father's brother, chimed in with what he clearly thought was a helpful suggestion. "You know, Maya, if things don't work out with the job search, Victoria might need a receptionist at her practice eventually. Someone to answer phones, manage the schedule. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work, and you'd be helping your sister." Working as my sister's receptionist. That was their vision for my future. Not as a creative professional, not as an entrepreneur, not as someone who had already achieved financial success they couldn't imagine, but as my sister's administrative assistant, answering phones and managing calendars, still in her shadow, still less than, still the daughter who couldn't quite measure up. Something inside me snapped. Not violently, but completely, like a cable that had been under tension for years finally reaching its breaking point. I'd spent my entire life being diminished, dismissed, and disappointed. I'd achieved extraordinary things while being told I was wasting my time. I'd built a successful business while being advised to be realistic. I'd proven myself over and over again to people who refused to see the proof because it didn't fit their narrative of what success was supposed to look like. I was done. Done with being invisible, done with being the consolation prize, done with pretending their ignorance didn't hurt. If they wanted to measure success, I'd show them exactly what I'd measured up to. "Actually," I said, my voice calm but loud enough to cut through the overlapping conversations, "I need to show you all something." I pulled my laptop out of my bag. I'd brought it planning to do some work after lunch. Since my family had made it clear this meal wasn't really about celebrating my achievement anyway. The restaurant had a private dining room visible from our patio table, and I could see through the glass walls that it was empty but set up with a presentation screen, likely for a corporate event later that evening. "Maya, what are you doing?" my mother asked, her face showing the first crack of concern. I didn't answer. I walked into the private dining room, found the cable to connect to the presentation screen, and linked my laptop. My hands were steady. My heart was pounding, but my fingers knew exactly what to do. Back at the table, I could see my family exchanging confused glances. Victoria looked curious. My parents looked uncomfortable. the way they always did when I deviated from expected behavior. I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder I'd titled The Real Maya. Documentation I'd been keeping meticulously for the past 4 years, not because I planned to use it this way, but because I was thorough and believed in tracking my own success. Since we're talking about real careers and what success looks like, I said, my voice eerily calm, I thought you might want to see what I've actually been doing for the past 4 years. I hit a button, and the presentation screen behind them flickered to life. The first image was simple: my bank statements, strategically edited to show only the balances and dates, no account numbers. 4 years of statements, starting from sophomore year, showing deposits that grew from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands. The table fell silent. I watched my father's face as he processed the numbers, his engineering brain automatically calculating totals. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes widening. Sophomore year, I narrated, advancing the slides, I earned $63,000 while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. Junior year, $112,000. Senior year, $165,000. Total earnings over 4 years, $342,000. That's not possible, my father said, but his voice was uncertain. You're a student, you're an artist, I finished for him. Someone who wastes time on computers, someone in an art phase. I advanced to the next slide, a timeline of my major projects, with client names redacted where NDAs required but details left intact. Let me show you what wasting time actually looks like. I walked them through it all. The YouTube creator whose merchandise I designed that launched both their career and mine. The album cover for Luna that went platinum. I pulled up photos of it on billboards, in magazines, on vinyl records selling for premium prices. The Super Bowl commercial they'd praised in this very house, the one my father called sophisticated work that makes real money. I played the commercial on the screen, then showed them my contract with the agency, the payment receipts, the NDA that prevented me from claiming public credit. This campaign you loved so much, I said. This real work that makes real money. I designed every element of it. The logo, the color palette, the typography, the animations. The agency paid me $120,000, and the car company's stock jumped 17% after launch. My mother was crying now, though I couldn't tell if it was from shock, guilt, or something else entirely. My father sat frozen, his wine glass forgotten, staring at the screen like it was showing him a daughter he'd never met. I showed them the gaming contract, the merchandise royalties that were still paying me monthly passive income. I showed them my business license for Lotus Creative Studio, my client roster that included 3 Fortune 500 companies, 2 major record labels, and a dozen smaller brands. I showed them the job offer from the Silicon Valley tech company, 6 figures, stock options, benefits package worth another $40,000 annually. I turned it down, I said. Not because I couldn't handle real work or because I'm impractical, but because I've spent 4 years building something better. My agency launches officially next month. We already have enough contracted work to project $500,000 in revenue by the end of year 2. I advanced to the next slide, my tuition payment receipts. Every semester, paid in full on time from accounts in my name. You paid for freshman year, I said, looking directly at my parents. I paid for the other 3 years myself, plus housing, food, textbooks, everything. I've been completely financially independent since I was 19 years old, and you never even noticed. The silence in that restaurant was deafening. Even the ambient noise of other diners seemed to fade away, leaving just my family and the inescapable evidence of my success, projected in high definition on a screen they couldn't look away from. Maya, Victoria said softly, and when I looked at her, I saw something I'd rarely seen from my sister, genuine awe mixed with shame. I had no idea, I'm so sorry. I should have. You should have defended me, I said, not angrily, just factually. Even once. When they dismissed my work, when they called it a phase, when they compared everything I did unfavorably to you, you knew I was talented. You've seen my work. But you never said anything because it was easier to be the golden child than to risk their disapproval by standing up for me. My sister's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. You're right, I'm sorry. I turned to my parents, who still looked shell-shocked, struggling to reconcile the daughter they thought they knew with the person standing in front of them. "I don't need your approval anymore," I said, and I meant it. "I don't need you to understand my career or validate my choices. I've— Maya, we didn't know," my mother started, but I held up a hand. "You didn't know because you never asked. You didn't know because you decided years ago that what I was doing wasn't worth knowing about. You didn't know because you were so invested in your narrow definition of success that you couldn't see achievement when it was happening right in front of you." I began disconnecting my laptop from the screen. "I came to my college graduation hoping, just once, that you'd be proud of me, that you'd celebrate my accomplishment without qualifiers or comparisons. Instead, you toasted Victoria's career and called mine a phase." My father finally found his voice. "Maya, we made mistakes, we were wrong, but we thought we were protecting you, steering you toward stability." "You were projecting your fears onto me," I interrupted. "You were so afraid of risk that you couldn't recognize when someone was managing it successfully. You confused security with success, and in doing so, you missed watching your daughter become exactly who she wanted to be." I closed my laptop and stood. "I'm leaving now. I have a client call at 4 with a company that values my expertise enough to pay me more for one project than you make in a month. I'm not angry anymore, and I don't hate you, but I'm done trying to earn respect from people who have proven they're not capable of giving it." "Please," my mother said, reaching for my hand, "don't leave like this. We can talk, we can understand." "You've had 4 years to understand," I said gently, pulling my hand back. "You've had hundreds of opportunities to ask about my work, to show interest in my life, to see me as something other than the daughter who disappointed you. You chose not to take them." I looked at Victoria, who was openly crying now. "I love you," I told her, and I meant it. "But I need you to understand that loving someone means seeing them, really seeing them, and you've been looking past me our entire lives. If you want a relationship with me going forward, that has to change." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "It will, I promise." I slung my laptop bag over my shoulder and walked out of that restaurant with my head high, leaving behind the remnants of a family dinner that had become my declaration of independence. Behind me, I could hear my mother's quiet sobs and my father's voice, low and shaken, saying something I couldn't quite make out. The valet brought my car around, a Tesla Model 3 I'd bought 6 months ago with cash, a purchase my parents didn't know about because they'd never asked what I drove. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of them through the restaurant window, still sitting at that table, staring at the now dark presentation screen like it held answers they'd been too stubborn to seek before. The following weeks were strange. My phone lit up with messages, long texts from my mother filled with apologies and attempts at explanation, shorter ones from my father that struggled to articulate emotions he'd spent a lifetime suppressing, daily calls from Victoria that I eventually started answering. They wanted to fix things, to rebuild a relationship on new terms, to prove they could change. I wasn't ready to make it easy for them, but I also wasn't interested in permanent estrangement. What I wanted, what I demanded was simple: respect. Not pride, not understanding, not even approval, just basic respect for my choices, my achievements, my path. My mother was the first to really try. She spent a week researching graphic design, reading articles about the creative industry, even taking an online course to understand the basics of what I did. She called me one evening and asked, genuinely asked, to hear about my work. Not what I planned to do with my life, not when I was going to get a real job, but about the work itself, what I loved about it, what challenged me, what I was proud of creating. We talked for 2 hours. I told her about the Luna album cover, about the moment the artist cried seeing it, about the feeling of walking through a Target and seeing my design on display. I told her about the gaming company contract, about learning animation because a project required it, about the satisfaction of solving visual problems that seemed impossible at first. My father took longer. Engineers aren't comfortable with ambiguity, and I think he struggled with the fact that creative careers don't follow the linear progression he understood. But he made an effort. He asked to see my portfolio, spent hours going through it with the same analytical attention he gave to structural plans. He asked questions about clients, revenue models, business sustainability. It wasn't emotional, but it was engaged. It was something. Victoria and I had the hardest conversation one afternoon at a coffee shop near her hospital. She apologized again, more fully, acknowledging not just the graduation dinner but years of complicity in our parents' favoritism. I always told myself you were strong enough that it didn't matter, she admitted. That you didn't need the same validation I did because you were so sure of yourself. But that was just me justifying my own cowardice. I needed you, I told her. When they dismissed my work, I needed you to say it was valuable. When they compared everything I did to you, I needed you to tell them to stop. You were the only one who could have made them listen, and you stayed silent. I know, she said, and I'm sorry. Can I ask, can I try to do better now? That was 2 years ago. Today, my relationship with my family isn't perfect, but it's honest. My parents still don't fully understand my career, but they've stopped treating it like something I'll outgrow. They ask about my projects, celebrate my successes in their own awkward way, and most importantly, they've stopped comparing me to Victoria or to their vision of what I should have become. My agency, Lotus Creative Studio, exceeded every projection I made. We brought in $800,000 in revenue the first year, won $2 million the second year. I've hired 6 full-time employees and regularly work with a network of freelancers. We've designed branding for startups that went on to unicorn status, created album covers that won Grammys, developed campaigns that shifted cultural conversations. But the success I'm most proud of isn't measured in dollars or awards. It's measured in the emails I get from young designers who tell me my story gave them courage to pursue creative careers despite family pressure. It's measured in the scholarship I established at USC for students in creative programs whose families can't or won't support them financially. It's measured in the relationship I'm slowly rebuilding with my parents, one based on mutual respect rather than conditional approval. Last month, my father asked if he could come to my studio, see where I worked. I showed him around, introduced him to my team, let him sit in on a client presentation. Afterward, as I walked him to his car, he said something that would have meant everything to me at 22, but somehow means even more now. I was wrong, he said simply. About your career, about your choices, about what success looks like. You built something remarkable, and I'm sorry I couldn't see it until you forced me to. I'm proud of you, Maya. I should have said that years ago. I hugged him, and for the first time in my adult life, it felt like my father was hugging his daughter, not the disappointment he'd tried to mold into someone else. My story isn't about revenge, not really. It's about the moment I stopped seeking validation from people who'd proven incapable of giving it and started validating myself. It's about the strength it takes to succeed in the face of doubt, especially when that doubt comes from the people who are supposed to believe in you most. It's about proving that there are many paths to success, and the one less traveled by your parents' generation isn't inherently more risky, it's just different. If you're reading this and you're facing similar family pressure to abandon your creative dreams for something practical, I want you to know something. They're wrong. Not about everything. Financial stability matters, planning for the future matters, developing marketable skills matters. But they're wrong that creativity can't provide those things. They're wrong that passion and practicality are mutually exclusive. They're wrong that you have to choose between what you love and what sustains you. The truth is, the creative industry is hard. It's competitive, sometimes unstable, often undervalued. You will work harder than your peers in traditional careers, at least at first. You will face rejection, criticism, and periods of uncertainty. But if you're talented, if you're strategic, if you're willing to treat your creativity as a business and not just a calling, you can build something extraordinary. And more importantly, you can build something that's yours. Not the life your parents wanted for you, not the career path society says you should follow, but something authentic to who you are and what you value. That ownership, that authenticity, is worth more than any amount of approval from people who refuse to expand their definition of success. I graduated college 2 years ago, on a day that should have been about celebration but became about revelation. I forced my family to see me, really see me, for the first time in my life. It wasn't gentle, and it wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Because at some point, you have to stop waiting for others to recognize your worth and start demanding they respect it. My relationship with my family is better now, but it's different. There's an honesty that didn't exist before, a foundation built on who I actually am rather than who they wanted me to be. We're rebuilding trust, relearning how to communicate, finding new ways to show love that don't require me to diminish myself for their comfort. I don't know if that will resonate with you. Maybe your family story is different. Maybe your parents are supportive, or maybe the damage is too deep to repair, or maybe you're still in the thick of it, trying to figure out whether to fight for their approval or let it go. All I can tell you is what worked for me, succeeding so undeniably that the evidence speaks for itself, and being willing to walk away if respect doesn't follow. That's my story. The day I graduated, the day I snapped, the day I stopped being invisible and forced my family to see the daughter they'd overlooked for 22 years. It wasn't the ending I wanted, but it was the beginning I needed. And everything that's come after the success, the healing, the hard-won respect, has been built on the foundation of that moment when I finally chose myself. If you're facing a similar choice, I hope my experience gives you courage. Your worth isn't determined by whether your parents understand your path. Your success isn't less real because it doesn't fit their definition. And your dreams aren't less valid because they scare the people who love you. You get one life. One chance to build something meaningful, to pursue what sets your soul on fire, to become the person you're meant to be rather than the person others expect. Don't waste it seeking approval from those who have already decided not to give it. Show them who you are, demand they respect it, and if they can't, build your life anyway. That's what I did, and I've never looked back.